Our scripture reading is from John 20, verse 1 to 18. Early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. She said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For until then they still hadn't understood the scriptures that says Jesus must rise from the dead. Then they went home. Mary was standing outside the tomb crying, and she wept. She stooped and looked in. She saw two white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angels asked her. "Because they have taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." She turned to leave and saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." "Mary," Jesus said. She turned to him and cried, "Rabboni," which is Hebrew for teacher. "Don't cling to me," Jesus said, "for I haven't yet ascended to the Father, but go find my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene found the disciples and told them, "I have seen the Lord." Then she gave him his message. This is the word of the Lord.
Easter is a great, great day of celebration within the Christian community. It's a time to remember not only the death of Christ, but also to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. And really, the resurrection is a world-changing event. It's a different world out there because of the life of Jesus and because he's raised. And it really, for the first Christians, in fact, by the way, that word Christians was not something that if you asked John or Mark initially or Mary, they wouldn't have known that word. That was kind of a negative word, that you little Christs. And the Christians took that on and said, yes, that's what we want to be. If that's who you think we are, we will take on that idea. But for the first Christians, that first Easter wasn't like wake up in the morning and have a sunrise service and get all excited. It was actually quite different. It was a day of confusion. It was a day in which they had to be confronted with an emptiness. They already had experienced emptiness in Jesus being arrested, in Jesus being treated like a villain, in Jesus being flogged, and Jesus ultimately being put on the cross and his death. I mean, that was empty. But then on this Easter Sunday, they came to the tomb and it was empty. And they did not yet know what it meant. And emptiness requires an explanation, doesn't it? When something's not there, we have to try to fill it in. And so we see in the story that they move from confusion to contemplation as John and Peter walk away and go home, wherever that was in Jerusalem that they went to, and they went, what does this mean? What does this mean that Jesus is no longer into the tomb? And they move from that into celebration. And so we're going to follow their path and encounter again emptiness today, especially, as part of embracing Jesus as the risen Lord that he is, as the one who has this great purpose to show us what life is like, a resurrected life is like. And we'll talk about that a little bit today, but Doug, will next week the response and reaction of the disciples as they encountered Jesus face to face, but then as Christians encountered him and as he changed their life. And so we hope that you'll be a part of that with us. But today really is about moving from that place of sorrow and sadness that we seek to take time to do when we have the Good Friday service. And as we move to Easter, not to be in too quick of a hurry to celebrate. We will get there. Don't worry. By the end of the service, we will get there. But I would encourage you to journey with me through that difficult moments, through the uncertainty, until we get to the place where we really can celebrate. Where the emptiness is so empty that when Christ fills it up, we are full to overflowing, not with ourselves, but with Him. And so I want to frame this today with a story from our life from way back in 2004. So just to give you an idea, this frames the message today. I think it reflects a little bit of what we see with Mary and John and Peter. But we had been here about a year, Beth and I and our 4 kids. We brought them over to Luxembourg, and we came here to start All Nations Church. And we didn't quite know if anybody would come. And look at you. Here you are. This is really a great thing every Sunday that you're here. But we really didn't know if that was the case or that would happen. And we partnered with people here for that purpose and had been here a little bit over a year. And then in November of 2004, we got a short paycheck. Now, if you're American, you understand what that is. If you're European, what's the short paycheck? A short paycheck is when we got paid about a third of what we expected to receive, because we raised support from different people in the States, and for some, there had been a mistake that happened accounting-wise that month, and so we got about a third. And I have to tell you, as you know, having 4 kids and not having a really high salary, there wasn't like a whole lot in the bank. And that happens to actually be Thanksgiving time in the States, so there's no way to get money in time. And I've got to pay rent, and I'm not going to be able to do it. And I'm supposed to feed kids. And I don't know how we're going to do that. And so to be honest, it was kind of a shock. And there was a lot of fear and also a little bit of, you always wonder when you bring your family on this great adventure, and I probably feel overly responsible for that sometimes, that you have to make sure it's okay. And at this point, I couldn't make sure that it was okay. And it was scary. And it was hard. And about that time as well, kind of together with that, Luxembourg, and this connects, Luxembourg had started internet banking. So I know we're really far ahead, right? 2004. Wow. Some of you don't imagine, how could you bank without the internet? It happened. It just took a long time, all right? But it happened. And so I had gotten this maybe a few weeks before, and I hadn't gone on my account because I'm not all that computer savvy, and I'm just busy. And so I thought, maybe I should go check and see what I have in the account. I know I don't have much, but I'll just go and check. And so I go in there, and it takes me about 40 minutes, because I'm, old, to try to figure it out. And it's the first time, and it's cumbersome. So, and I go in there, and I open up this, and there's way too much money in that bank account. And so I get off as fast as I can, because I'm terrified. I'm in someone else's account. I don't know why they did this. I don't know how they did this, but I'm talking more than 5,000 more than should be in there, and less than 25,000. Okay, so more than I've ever seen in a bank account with these eyes up to that point. And so I get off because I'm afraid if I start messing around and figuring this out, that I'm going to get in trouble with the law when they figured out that I got in this account. It's not my fault. So this, this weird kind of what's going on here kind of kept in my mind. And so I finally snuck back on the account again. Now it's my account, but I felt like I was sneaking back on. And I checked, and it's got my name at the top. That can't be. How can it be my account? There's money in that account. That shouldn't be there. And I figured, obviously the bank has made a mistake. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to catch it, and all that money that I could get excited about, which I'm not going to get excited about, they're going to take out. And it's not going to be there. And I'm going to be right back where I was before. So I didn't get excited. I closed the account, and then, I don't know if it was the next day or whatever, I opened the account back up again, and I just had to look at it some more. And I had forgotten that about 4 months earlier, with the encouragement of some of the people in the church, we signed up for this thing called Kinder Money, or Kindergeld. Some of you know it. It's money the state gives you if you have kids. What a great thing. I wouldn't have stopped at 4 if I'd known, right? You get money for kids. It's great. And we didn't, so we were not in the Luxembourg system at that point, and so they said, you probably won't get it, but you should try, and so we did. And well, this was a year of kindergeld for our kids that was stuck in there. And I got to tell you, I went from shock and fear to joy and excitement in like a second when I realized that's ours. I mean, it's Luxembourg's, but it's mine. And we get to enjoy it. And we're going to be able to pay the rent. We're going to be able to feed the kids and have a little fun too. And we did have some fun. And it was a great moment. But I think I want to give you that story as kind of an encapsulating what this story has in it. The shock and the fear, the uncertainty, the emptiness, the fact that you can't fix this. To trying to see what is going on, what does this mean, until it ultimately ends in celebration. And so we have really 3 scenes in here, 3 parts. We have Mary going to the tomb. We have Peter and John running to the tomb and encountering the empty tomb. And we also then have Mary coming back. And so we're going to deal with this in kind of 3 parts, 3 directions, as we try to understand what it was really like for these early Christians, so that we can celebrate along with them. And not just on our own, but celebrate because we've experienced what they've experienced as well. And so we see here in this passage that Mary was one of the first at the tomb. In fact, John singles her out, although we see from other Gospels that Mary and other women went to the tomb. And Mary was there, and she saw the empty tomb, and she didn't know what it meant. And so she goes after seeing the empty tomb, that the stone has been rolled away, and she goes and she talks to Peter and John, and she tells them this. She says that they have taken the Lord out of the grave, and we don't know where they have put him. And so this is the message that she carries, the uncertainty, the emptiness that she brings. And emptiness in all of our lives requires an explanation, doesn't it? We have to know, why is it empty? Why are things not the way they are? Why are they gone? Why is there loss? We have to fill that emptiness in some way, shape, or form. Why is there an empty tomb? Mary asks. Where has Jesus gone? And so in light of that, Mary does what we all do. She tries to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Who would steal the body of Jesus? And for her, I think, the answer, we have some clues in here. The answer is probably this. The answer is that she believed the grave robbers had come and taken the body of Jesus away. And that would happen in this day. It wasn't unusual. What they would do is they would take the body and they would take the spices and herbs that were put over to keep, as the body decomposed, to keep the smell. And they would take that and they would recycle it and they would sell it to other people. I know, doesn't sound really nice, does it? But that was some ways that people made a living. They would take the cloth, the linen, that wrapping that was around Jesus, and they would wash it and clean it and dry it, and they would sell it to other people. And those things were valuable. And then they would dump the body because, well, the body has no value. And so Mary probably went to Peter and John and said, they've taken the body. The they is probably, we don't know for sure, but probably in her mind, grave robbers. And it was her explanation of why it's empty. And the mind must have an explanation. It must make sense, or so it seems, of the challenges. And so Peter and John hear this news, and they take, at least to some degree, Mary seriously, and they run to the tomb. And John, probably being younger, and Peter being older, John gets there first. And he looks in the tomb, and he sees the grave clothes there, the linen wrapping, and he sees that the tomb is empty. And as Peter gets there, and as in very typical Peter fashion, Peter's just not going to watch from the outside. He goes in. And probably has to duck down in and go into the tomb. He wants to see the fullness of what is there and what isn't there. And he as well sees the emptiness that's there. The scene is of complete emptiness, except for one thing that does not make sense to them as they walk in. The linen strips are there. The valuable parts to sell and to give away, to have for others, they're there. And if you're going to steal a body, You don't steal the body for the body, you steal the body for the linen and the spices, and those are probably exactly right there. We know the linen it doesn't speak about the spices, but they're probably there embedded in the linens. And so they go, wait a second, this idea of a grave robber doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. And in the process of probably those thoughts and those ideas and taking in this information and trying to make sense of it, John goes in as well. And it's interesting, it says here that in the passage that John believes that Jesus is risen from the dead in some way, shape, or form. Now, belief in John can go all the way to full-fledged, absolutely, completely believe to, yeah, I think it might be probably true. And so we don't know the extent of John's belief. It's probably just a seed. And he probably doesn't share it with Peter because there's no sense in this passage that Peter and him have a discussion and say, yeah, that could be, that would make sense. That could be the explanation. Probably what John does, which we often do, we have an idea, we have a thought, we have a belief, and we hold it in. And we think about it before we say something, stupid, right, to other people. And so it's likely that John is in there thinking about this reality, believing maybe Jesus is raised from the dead. None of them up until that point had that thought. But that thought comes to John. And so they both go home to contemplate that, to think about what they have seen, an empty tomb, and what they have not seen, the body of Jesus. And what does it mean? And if you're thinking from John's perspective, he's thinking, well, maybe Jesus has risen from the dead. If you were to ask John, what does that mean? I think John would go, I don't know. What does rising from the dead mean? What impact does it have? I have no idea. And yet, at the end of this chapter, as Jesus has met with the disciples, one of the things that John says is really, really powerful. John says in verse 29 of chapter 20, he quotes Jesus and saying, blessed is those who have believed in the resurrection without seeing it. He said, blessed are you, disciples, because you see me and you believe. How much more blessed are those who haven't seen and yet believe. And John was one of those few who had faith before he could see. Mary didn't. Peter didn't. John did. John knows what we know. The joy, the amazement of believing without seeing. Of having encountered Christ in some way, shape, or form, or the truth of this, and saying, yes, this is true. This changes my life. You know, if you think about, for these people, how hard it was to come to that conclusion that Jesus was raised from the dead. You know, at the time of this, before John had this thought, it's not like Mary and Peter and John, understood resurrection. They would have been like most people we meet and talk to and see, outside of maybe our family unit or maybe outside in our workplace, who, if you said, do you believe in the resurrection? Yeah, maybe. Could have been. I'm not sure. Haven't taken a position yet. Or say, no, that's just old religious stuff. And I think sometimes it's good for us to remember that they were in that camp of those who didn't believe in the resurrection. Now, they changed. They had an encounter with Christ, which is, by the way it usually happens, isn't it? We come to understand in some way, have an encounter with Christ. We understand some truth that comes from God, and we say, you know what? It's true. Jesus is the risen Lord. But they found it hard to understand this. The people who spent 3+ years with Jesus, watched him teach, watched him heal, watched him raise Lazarus from the dead. They also found it hard to believe. And I think that's important for us because we can think that, believing this is just easy. Maybe because we were raised that way. Maybe because we've lived with it long enough that we think, yeah, of course Jesus is raised from the dead. But being raised from the dead is an amazing thing. Not an easy thing to believe at all. And yet, when we believe it, it changes everything. It literally changes everything about life. What was previously impossible now is real, and therefore all kinds of other things are possible. I'm going to give you just one example, but there are many, many, and we'll talk about some over the next few weeks. But let me tell you this, just one example. Because Jesus was rose from the dead, precious people that you and I know and loved will be raised from the dead as well. Will be raised with Christ. My dad, raised with Christ. Beth's mom, Audrey, will be raised with Christ. Dave and Joan Winstrom. Dave was the guy who had the idea for us to come to Luxembourg. Now, he said you should go to Zurich, but, he's just an American with a geography problem. Not a big deal, right? But it happens all the time. But Dave and Joan, precious, precious people to us. Their daughter, Chris, Anna Christopher, who passed away this last year. She'll be raised with Christ. And you're thinking of some people right now, aren't you? Parents, friends, loved ones. They're going to be raised with Christ too. That's what the resurrection does. That's what Jesus does. That's what's happening here. They don't yet quite understand it, but they're going to learn that they too, that Jesus is the first of those who are raised from the dead. And he brings the rest of us along with him. And as you get older and as you lose more people, it becomes more important and more meaningful and more powerful and more life-changing that this is not the end at the grave. This is just the beginning. Our passage moves from this reality that John and Peter walk away with different thoughts probably. Peter wondering, what is this? John starting to believe. And then we have Mary who's come back to the tomb crying. Maybe she went back to the tomb to look for answers, to look for clues, to try to make sense of what was going on. Her heart is full of sorrow. Her eyes are full of tears. And her mind is looking for answers. And so she comes and she's there. And the answer comes to her through an encounter with Jesus. Isn't that great? Again, as I mentioned before, that's the way it happens. We have some kind of encounter with the risen Lord, and it changes what we think, what we believe. And then she also has this encounter before this with two, as she looks into the tomb and she sees there what is two angels. Now my take is that Mary doesn't realize they're angels, probably because she's been crying and her eyes are swollen. And I don't know if you've ever had this, probably have when you've been crying a lot. You can't really see much. You see forms and things, but you don't really see people all that clearly. And I think Mary sees them in there, and they ask her this question, why are you crying? Which is like, don't you know? Of course it makes sense that she's crying. And so she answers them. She says, they've taken away my Lord. And likely, again, they is probably what she assumes to be grave robbers. And I don't know where they put him. And if I did, I would bring back his body and I would take care of it and I would give him a proper burial. And I would make sure this never happened again to my precious Jesus. This one who has done so much for me. And she hears no answer from them. Just a question. Why are you crying? She turns and she encounters someone. John tells us, and this someone who she doesn't know who he is because she can't really see, asks her two questions. The first she's heard already. Why are you crying? The answer is obvious, except for that it is the risen Lord who is asking her this question. But she doesn't know it yet. She can't see it yet. And he asks her also, who are you looking for? And I hope you catch a little bit of the irony in this. Jesus saying to Mary, who are you looking for? Who is she looking for? Jesus. But he's right there, but she doesn't yet understand and doesn't see. And so if these were questions just from the gardener, you would understand them as just natural interactions of care and concern and what's going on. But when we understand this is Jesus, we need to see it as a mild rebuke, a loving rebuke. Mary, don't you know what's happening? Mary, don't you know I'm risen? Mary, don't you know that life has changed and I have changed life? Don't you know? And of course the answer is, She doesn't. Which might give us hope sometimes when we don't. Even when we are encountering Christ and we don't know it. And it's not until she hears her name from the lips of Jesus, Mary, that she realizes that it's him. It's not the one tending the tombs, but it's Jesus. The risen Lord is there in front of her, and he is speaking to her. And it's such a great way that it happens like this. Because if you remember back in John 10, so this is John 20. In John 10, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, and I have my sheep, and my sheep know me, and my sheep hear my voice, and I call them by name, and they listen to me, and they follow me, and then lay that on top of this. And it's a powerful image of Jesus speaking as the great shepherd, Mary's name. I am here. And immediately she gets it. Immediately in hearing Jesus say her name, she realizes it's Jesus. And I just want you to take in this moment because it's shocking and amazing that she is by the grave. She is full of sorrow. She is empty, and when she hears that, she is full. She goes from sorrow to celebration. She goes from seeking Jesus to being a messenger to go tell the disciples, Jesus is risen, like that. Can you feel that? Do you know what that can you imagine just for a moment what that must have been to be that empty and to be that filled up and to have that kind of hope? Because of what Jesus has done and who he is. You see, I think sometimes when we go directly from Good Friday or last Sunday to the resurrection, we kind of go, yeah, it's great, isn't it? Good stuff. This Easter thing. I like it. But because we never lost Jesus, there's no real value in finding him. But see, the disciples lost Jesus. And because of that, there was incredible value in finding the risen Lord. You see, the resurrection loses its amazement when we forget that we had lost him. We thought we had lost him, but he is here. He is risen. And he's not just risen to change their life and to change their perspective, but he's risen to change our lives too, to raise us up, to help us to live in a new way, to free us to come back into that relationship with God which we left and could never get back to. But through his death, we can come back. Not because of what we do or who we are, but because of what he did and who he is. And so it makes a whole lot more sense to rejoice in Easter, to be able to say he is risen with joyful hearts in light of that. So I'm going to ask the musicians if they'd come back up. And you may have seen back here, this he is risen, and Doug kind of led us in this before, but I come from a tradition that it's important to have this call and response. And the call is that I give is he is risen, and then your part is he is risen indeed, okay? You have to kind of, add the indeed at the end, okay? But you guys could do that, right? So I want you to do this with me. He is risen. He is risen. Stand with me. He is risen. He is risen. He is risen. He is risen. Amen.